Hi, my name is Alyna Ohling, and I am an educator at CAPSA, and today I'm going to be talking about healthy relationships. So to start, we're going to talk about how we have several relationships in our lives. We have relationships with friends, family, neighbors, our coworkers, maybe teammates and coaches. And in thinking about all of these relationships, we often think about one of the most important relationships that we develop, and that is the relationship with ourselves. To have healthy relationships with others, it's really important that we prioritize that relationship, because if we don't have a healthy relationship with ourselves, it's more difficult to form those healthy relationships with others. So honestly, I used to think of self-care solely as bubble baths, shopping sprees, maybe eating dessert before dinner, sitting in my pajamas all day, watching my favorite TV show on Netflix. But self-care is a lot more than that. And so today I want you to think about some of the maybe bigger, the harder parts of self-care. So some of these difficult elements of self-care, one of the first ones is saying no. Often when people ask us to do something, we want to be able to say yes. We don't want to disappoint. But one of the most important things we can do for ourselves is set boundaries. And one of the ways we do that is by saying no. Another element of self-care is forgiving yourself. For me, that's been something that's really difficult. There's been things in my life, regrets, things I wish I wouldn't have done, that have made me feel guilty. But I've found that as I've forgiven myself, I've been able to move forward and let go of some of that shame that I've felt. Because honestly, I think similar to a lot of people, I'm my own worst critic. Something else that's really crucial is to ask for what you need. I think sometimes we feel that if we're asking for what we need or we're asking for help, we're incapable, but that's not true. Often if we're asking for help, it helps us to learn and grow, and in some situations it can be very life-changing to ask for help. So when we put our needs above others' needs, we're actually able to build confidence and self-esteem. And as our confidence and our self-esteem increases, we're more capable of being better upstanders. So as we start this conversation about healthy relationships, something that I want you to think about and consider is, who is someone who has made you feel good about yourself? This can be someone maybe you just met, or someone that you've known a long time. It can be someone that's really close to you, or someone that maybe you just met in passing. But I want you to think what they did that made you feel good. So who made you feel good, and then what their actions were that made you feel that way. So for me, things that have been really impactful in my relationships and things that have made me feel good about myself are when people respect me, when people believe in me, when people take time out of their busy lives to help me. That lets me know that they care. When I was growing up, we had a really hard thing happen in my family. And there was this lady, she was one of my mom's acquaintances, not a great friend, but our family knew her and she obviously knew us. But when this thing happened, she was the first to be at our door with meals and kind words. And when we would need to go places or do things, she was always there to help with that. And that really impacted me because her actions made me feel good and made me feel valued. So although we have several different relationships in our lives, we often look for the same qualities in those relationships, whether that's with friends or families, coworkers, teammates. We want people to care about us. We want to feel trusted and supported. And even though the dynamics of those relationships are different, we look for those same things. We want to feel good in our relationships. Often, when we talk about relationships, we tend to focus on the negative. We tend to focus on the warning signs or the things that make a relationship unhealthy. And today, we want to put a positive spin on it. We want to talk about the things that make a relationship healthy. So today, we're going to talk about relationship green flags. I know we talk about relationship red flags, but today, like I said, we're focusing on these positive things. So some of the elements of a healthy relationship that we'll talk about are things like honoring boundaries, making compromise, supporting each other, having hobbies. Another one that we're going to be talking about is trust. So one of the first things we want to talk about is having healthy hobbies. So like we talked about earlier, in healthy relationships, we can't let our self-care take the back seat. Healthy hobbies and doing things that you enjoy are a sign of a healthy relationship. And just to make note, obviously these things go both ways. So if a relationship is to work, both individuals need to have healthy hobbies, and that'll be true of trust and those things that we'll talk about. Obviously, in a relationship, it's normal to want to be together and spend time together and to prioritize, but there needs to be an understanding that there is a need for time spent apart, for time to do the things that you enjoy. For me, something that I really enjoy is going on runs. And so that's something that in my relationship, we've established that I take my time to do that, and my husband takes time to do the things that he enjoys. And we've found that in taking time to prioritize our hobbies and the things that we enjoy, when we come back together, we're actually a lot happier. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is supporting personal growth. Obviously, we should be supportive of one another's growth and achievements and successes. We should encourage the other person, like I said, to enjoy their hobbies and to spend time doing the things that they enjoy. You should focus on building each other up. This can be really difficult because sometimes in a relationship, there's going to be competition. Think, for example, like a sports team or an athletic team. You may feel some competition, but if we're having the healthiest relationship possible, we're going to be there for our teammates and our significant others and our family and work to build them up. So another very important part, arguably one of the most important parts of healthy relationships, is honoring boundaries. So we're going to talk about 3 different kinds of boundaries today. We're going to talk about emotional boundaries, physical boundaries, and digital boundaries. So physical boundaries. It's easy to think of physical boundaries as like a fence, or just like marked, like your personal space. When we talk about physical boundaries in relationships, it's pretty straightforward. It's really important that you take your time. You don't have to rush into something that you're not ready for. And in setting your boundaries, it's okay if what you're comfortable with doesn't match with what your partner's comfortable with. There will need to be a discussion. And the most important thing is that you share your boundaries and know that those boundaries deserve to be respected. So something else that's, I think, a really important element of physical boundaries is knowing that there is nothing that you have to do. You don't owe anybody anything, no matter if they buy you a gift or take you out to a nice dinner. Your boundary still stands, and no one can take that from you. So emotional boundaries. So one of the important things is to express feelings as you're ready. We often think of the example of telling someone you love them. I remember when my husband and I knew each other for a really long time, and we didn't start dating until we were in college, but we had been spending time apart. He was in Washington and I was in Utah, and he texted me, I don't remember exactly, but something like, "I really love you." And I panicked and I was like, I'm not ready for this. I don't want you to tell that to me yet. I don't feel ready. And so I explained that to him, and it was an incredibly awkward conversation, but he was respectful of that boundary. I wasn't ready because I didn't feel like I was in that place yet. And so although I knew he felt that way, he was respectful that that wasn't a conversation we were going to continue having. Something else that's really important is taking time apart. Now, I don't mean that you should break up with your significant other and go and date other people. If you're in a committed relationship, that's fine. But what I mean is that it's really important to take some time doing the things that you enjoy, like we had talked about previously. Once you get into a relationship, it's important to not let the other relationships that you had prior to that just kind of fall. We know that one of the red flags of a relationship is that your partner tries to isolate you from those people you care about. And so we want to encourage you to continue building friendships and relationships with family and doing the things you enjoy, building relationships with maybe sports teams or a school group that you enjoy being involved in. So we're going to talk about digital boundaries next. Digital boundaries can be tricky, but what I mean by digital boundaries is determining, for example, are you going to make your relationship status known online? Are you going to post pictures of one another? How are you going to talk about your relationship online? And then something else to consider is how are you going to communicate and how often when you're not together? So for some couples, that may look like sending a couple texts a day. For others, they may communicate more. But you have to know what your boundaries are so that when you get into those relationships, it's decided and you know what you want. And then as the relationship progresses, it's normal that boundaries can change. So when you set boundaries, know that you will likely not agree on everything, and that's okay. In a healthy relationship, there should be respect and understanding of that. And then something else I want to mention is if you have a desire to do something in a relationship that you've not already discussed when talking about boundaries, you have to ask permission to change that boundaries. This is what we call consent. So I want to take a minute and talk about consent. Consent, the easiest way for me to think of consent or to remember all that consent entails is to think of fries. So consent is freely given. It's reversible, meaning say that one day you're okay with something and then 3 days later you decide that that's something you don't feel comfortable with. That's reversible. You can take it back. In addition, consent is informed, it's enthusiastic, and it's specific. So setting these boundaries and having consent in a relationship is one way that we start to build trust. Building trust is a process. It takes time. It's something that we can't demand. It's something that we can't expect another person to have. It's something that we build together, and it's a choice. Trusting someone is a choice that you and that person make. So something I think that is important to mention is addressing the question, what if you have been burned? What if someone has really destroyed your trust in the past? It can be really difficult to rebuild that trust. It can be really difficult to feel like you could ever trust again. And in those situations, we want you to know that you can reach out to someone. There are certainly situations where it may take an outside resource, someone beyond yourself, talking to maybe a parent or a counselor or someone at school that you trust or a friend to help relearn how to build that trust. So like I said, building trust is a process. So there's some questions we want you to consider in this building process. So the first is this person there for me? And that doesn't just include physically. Are they also there for you emotionally? Can you tell that they genuinely care about you and your well-being? The next maybe step or question in this process is this person consistent? So one way to demonstrate trustworthiness is through consistency. Do they show up on time to events? Are they always respecting your boundaries? Are they kind to others? And then the next step is, do their actions and words match? So I'm sure you've all heard the phrase, this person is all talk. That can be difficult because what that means is what they're saying and what they're doing aren't aligning. One way to continue to build that trust is to understand what each other's needs and expectations are. And really the only way to do that is to talk and to communicate. In a relationship, communication is key. We're going to talk about a few different elements of communication that are really important. The first one I want to talk about is finding the real issue. We, as people, all have very different perspectives. We've all been raised differently. maybe in different places with different circumstances, and so our perspective is different. And so we might see that someone is feeling upset about something, and we might not know why. And so in order to determine the real issue, we have to ask questions. Something else that's really important, specifically to communication, is understanding and figuring out boundaries and setting those boundaries. So even in the midst of conflict and argument, both people deserve to be treated with respect. And I understand this can be difficult, but it's really necessary. So some things, if voices start to escalate, or the conversation is becoming demeaning or things like that, you can set the boundary of space and say, I need to take a step away and let's address this later, or time. That's a boundary that you can set when communicating, because we want to resolve conflict, but sometimes we just need a little bit of space. So another thing that is important is compromising. And when we talk about compromise, certainly there are a lot of things that we can compromise about. Maybe where we go for dinner, what movie you're watching, things like that. But when considering compromise, if something is really important to you, or maybe deals with your morals or ethics, and the other person isn't willing to compromise, consider maybe that relationship, or maybe you and that other person aren't totally compatible, and that's okay. Another really important part of communication is agreeing to disagree. There will be things that you might not be on the same page about, and if they're things that, like we said earlier, don't deal with those morals and ethics and your values, it's probably okay to agree to disagree. If it's something you feel like you can't agree to disagree, you need to make sure that your opinion is heard. And then once again, consider the relationship. Okay, the last thing for communication is to consider everything. So when we talked about finding the real issue, we talked a little bit about how each person has a different perspective on life. And so it's important to consider all that may contribute to their perspective. Okay, we're going to now talk about how important it is to value the thoughts and opinions of others. So when we're communicating and resolving conflict in a healthy relationship, we will listen and try to understand where the other person is coming from, because we each have our own opinions. In healthy relationships, you value your partner's thoughts and opinions, and they value yours. So something that's important in that is letting your partner know that you're hearing what they're saying, that you're keeping their ideas in mind. And one of the most important things in that is respect. And respect is essential in maintaining those healthy relationships. So all of these things, all of these pieces of building healthy relationships, these green flags, all will help you to become a better upstander. I want to explain this to you in a little bit of an analogy. I want you to think of milk for a second. We know what good milk tastes like. If we were to because we know what good milk tastes like, we also know what bad or sour milk tastes like. So if you were to pour some cereal and grab the milk and dump it out and take a bite and it's sour and maybe has curdled a little bit, you would take action. Instantly, you would take that cereal, toss it down the drain, throw the milk out. Compare this to relationships. If we become really familiar with what a healthy relationship looks like, it will be incredibly obvious to us when a relationship isn't as healthy. By understanding healthy relationships, you're going to be more equipped to identify problem behaviors and stand up against them. We want you to become familiar with what healthy relationships, to build healthy relationships, to establish healthy relationships so that you can stand up for others. Because chances are you will have to explain to someone what a healthy relationship looks like. And we want you to be able to do that. Sometimes we may see someone in a relationship that doesn't have these healthy behaviors. We may notice that maybe there's some of those unhealthy behaviors creeping in. And in those situations, we want to empower you to stand up, to lift up, and to speak up. And with your friends, you do this by believing them. You do this by helping them find resources and letting them know that they don't deserve to be treated that way.